Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so it says reconciled. Okay, so it says if you anticipate a split, right? If you anticipate a split. Now the word is nushuz. Nushuz means al-irtifa, to raise up. So you say so she's nashiza, meaning she's not down, she's up, right? And she's disobedient. Similarly, and this is important, we also refer to him as nashiz. So it is not just a woman who is disobedient, right? Here we're talking about a woman who is obedient to her husband. But similarly, a man can be nashiz, right? So it's from both sides, right? Um, and so, fiqh-wise, right? Fiqh-wise, like, what does that really mean, right? So, what does it mean that, for example, the husband's not doing his job? I mean, as we mentioned in the group, right? Like, if he's not doing his job, then she raises it to court, right? So, that's a kind of slightly different issue. But like, what kind of things could he not do? Not pay, not do this, not do that. But one thing that's kind of a bit more tangible is consistent emotional abuse, right? Consistent emotional abuse. So they're always arguing, for example, right? Or he's always criticizing her, right? And it's continual. Something like that, right? Shouting, etc. So it says, appoint a mediator from his family and another from her. So here the fuqaha debate. This mediator, what is he doing? Right? This mediator, is this a mediator just like a friend? Right? Is this somebody who's going to come and just give some advice? Or is this actually a legal thing? So based on that, the whole nature of what this mediator can do changes. So if we say he is a legal representative, then the mediator comes in and chooses whether or not this marriage should continue, and then divorces her in spite of him. So he's like, no, 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 we can still work this out. And the mediator's like, no, this is not working out. And this is not going to happen. And so now we, in the capacity as a legal in my legal capacity as a mediator, I'm actually we are going to divorce her, not annulling the marriage. And annulling the marriage is something else. But this is basically divorce her, right? And so that's what they're going to do. The other opinion is no, it's just a mediate. It's just somebody coming to mediate. Like we don't have to listen to you. You know, that's like if you can imagine the two different issues, like there's two companies, they don't want to go to court, so they agree to arbitration, and they sign a contract saying that we will follow the opinion of mediation, this mediator, right? So now the mediator, that's binding now, right? As opposed to, hey, we just had somebody to come and talk to the two of us about something, like try and help us come to an agreement, right? So there's difference agreement based on then the nature of what he does. So according to the Shafis, we say no, it's not. He has no legal authority, and he says, yeah, you know, you guys should separate. And then the husband says, no, I want to stay together. Okay, right. So it says, if they desire reconciliation, Allah will restore harmony between them. So the point is, then there should be harmony, all right? There should be wifaq, there should be agreement, things should be working out in general, right? And so one thing again, just a side point is, there's a sheikh, he said this, he said, somebody who does not have marriage problems is a liar, right? Somebody says like, how's your marriage? 100% perfect, never any issues. That's not really the case, right? So you could have a relationship, right, where nobody ever complains, right? Because everybody knows that there's no point in complaining, right? So, but that doesn't mean that it's good, right? You might have this, like, it's like always tense. It's always negative, right? But this is the nature of humans is like that, right? Two moving objects. There's always going to be a point where the two of them touch and there's friction or they separate, right? So that's just the nature of things. So it's very important to be mature. And Islam is not about having perfect Disney relationship all the time, but it is about dealing with things in a proper way, right? Don't take things personally. Don't get angry. Sit down, listen, try and accommodate, try and overlook certain things, agree to change things, right? People are not the same. I'm sure if you go and ask somebody who has more than one wife, or has been married, anybody who's married more than once, each marriage is different. The way that two people come together is not the same. There isn't one set way. So things, but you have to be flexible. And some people, unfortunately, they're not flexible, right? And this is the issue, unfortunately, with people who are too scared because of social media and TV. They're too scared to get married because what if I get married? It won't be perfect. So then they don't get married until they're 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're already very, very set in their ways, right? She has a certain schedule, he has a certain schedule. There's very little flexibility. Whereas in principle, there's more flexibility in a teenage marriage, right? You're 16, you got married, all right, and you kind of, there's much more flexibility. Obviously, there's a lot more harm. There could be much more harm for a 16-year-old getting married, right? Or an 18-year-old getting married because there's immaturity. So there's pros and cons. But this is a key thing, is that flexibility. Just you need to not be so stubborn, right? And then it continues, says, and worship Allah alone and associate none with him, and be kind to parents, relatives, orphans, the poor, the near and distant neighbors, close friends, right? And here, close friends can also mean your spouse, right? Needy travelers and those bondsmen, slaves in your possession. So the Prophet passed away, basically doing three things: washing his teeth, right, with the siwak. Number two, telling us the prayer, make sure you pray on time, and make sure you pray properly, make sure you pray in the group, and وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, and look after slaves, right? So slavery did exist, right? It's a reality of the world, and the Prophet ﷺ said, look after these people. You're in a situation of authority, they're in a situation of a weak situation, they are the weakest people in society, so look after them, right? And unfortunately, we have to admit to the fact that the Muslims are not responsible for what happened in the Americas to slaves, right? They're not responsible. You can't be responsible for other people's actions. But it is historically true to say that many Muslims sold many of these slaves to these Europeans, and often knowing what would happen to them, right? And there's difference of agreement. Can you do that or not? Can a Muslim sell a slave to a non-Muslim? So certainly you cannot sell a Muslim slave to a non-Muslim. You can't do that, right? You cannot. If you had a Muslim slave, you couldn't sell your Muslim slave to a non-Muslim. Just like you can't marry a woman to a Muslim woman to a non-Muslim man, right? You can't have authority. You can't have a non-Muslim cannot have authority over a Muslim. It's not possible. So some scholars as well, they add you can't even sell a non-Muslim slave to a non. You couldn't if a Muslim had a non-Muslim slave, because a non-Muslim slave is almost like part of your family. You cannot give him to a non-Muslim, right? And so it is important for Muslims to be cognizant of that. Is that there is a responsibility, some level of responsibility for what happened in the Americas and North and South America in the slave trade, that Muslims are responsible for that because they did it. Islam is not responsible for it. Islam does not encourage that, and that's not how it's supposed to be. But Muslims were part of it, right? So Muslims were part of the slave trade, right? So that's important, right? And so this is an issue, right? Where does the guitar come from? Muslims. Where does weed come from? I mean, they say it came from Central Asia, but basically Muslims. Where does belly dancing come from? Muslims, right? It's like, well, it's a problem, right? So Muslims are not perfect, right? Islam is perfect, but Muslims are not perfect, and it's important to, where there's a fault, to own it and correct it, right? And so, Allahu a'lam. I don't know what the difference. What is chattel slavery? Oh, okay. What's the difference? Okay, sorry? Okay, I understand now. So what's the difference is, number one, the main thing is the human rights, right? So you can't treat an animal like that, let alone a human, right? So the way that slaves are treated, you can't treat an animal like that, let alone a human. So the Prophet ﷺ, for example, he said, anybody who separates a mother from the child, Allah will separate him from his loved ones on Judgment Day, right? So that was a common thing that happened to many of them. There's the idea that it's not a human. It's neither a human nor is an animal, has no rights. Whereas in Islam, the slave has rights. The Prophet said, feed them as you eat and dress them as you dress, right? You look at the Sahaba will be out there working with their slaves, right? Treat them well. So yes, you own this individual. That is true. You do own that person, right? You can sell that person. You can tell the person do this and don't do this. It's true, right? But you have to treat them well, right? And so that's not good treatment to sell your slave to somebody who you know is going to abuse. That's not good treatment. You can't do that, right? Similarly, how can you become a slave, right? How can you become a slave? Do you become a slave through race? No, right? So it's not through race, number one. And number two, in Islam, the only way you can become a slave is being a prisoner of war. Right? So there is legitimate jihad between the Muslims and non-Muslims, and then the Muslims are captured, non-Muslims are captured, right? Like at Badr, right? At Badr, they set many of them free, etc. But in principle, you could become a POW, a prisoner of war, and then you are distributed among the Muslims, right? You become distributed uh, um, like many of the Sahaba, uh, many of the Tabi'in were like that. Like Makhul al-Shami. Makhul al-Shami, who was of the early Muslims, of the Tabi'een, the students of the Sahaba, he was captured when the Muslims were conquering Kabul in Afghanistan. So he was captured, taken prisoner, taken back to Damascus, and he was a slave. But he grew up as a scholar, and he was the Mufti of Damascus, even though he was a slave, well, previously a slave. Or Ata ibn Rabah, right? He was actually black. So Ata ibn Rabah was the Mufti of Mecca. He was black, and he was originally a slave as well. And there was a certain time he was on Hajj. He was the only person who was allowed to give fatwa, right? So he was black, and he was a slave originally. Um, So the only way you could become a slave is through being a prisoner of war. Yeah. So that's another way. So you can't just buy somebody, right? Well, you couldn't like make yourself a slave. I now so in medieval Europe, you could become a slave through debt, right? I owe so much money to Zaid that basically he's like, you can't pay up, can you? Say, no, I can't. Okay, I'm going to take you and your family as slaves now, right? So that was a system that existed in many stages of human history, right? Different ways you could become slaves through birth, through race, through debt, through various different things like that, right? Whereas in Islam, it's only through jihad, only through jihad. Yeah. Does that make sense? So somebody like there's a video online. Dr. Jonathan Brown, he has a really good talk on slavery. So it's a totally different picture, right? There's slaves, for example, that have been rulers, right? Right. Al-Hafidh al-Sakhawi has a book called الضوء اللامع في أعيان القرن التاسع. So he's a great hadith scholar. He just wrote a biography of amazing people in the ninth century, Hijri, ninth century, right? 500 years ago. And one of them is a person called Badr. There's a man called Badr, right? It says Badr was a slave, but he was so skilled in calligraphy, in rhetoric, in politics, that he was headhunted, meaning he's not headhunted for hire, he's being bought. So he's being bought and sold by all these big businessmen because he's a really good politician, he's a really good businessman, he's a really good negotiator, he's really good at talking, eloquent, etc. Right? So it's a very different picture. Um, it's a very different picture to the way that we see slavery. You know that in the books of fiqh they say if you imagine if you sold a slave and you had put ink on his clothes and such that it looked like he could write, and then it turned out he couldn't write. Would that be considered like cheating somebody or not? Right. So the idea is that people were bought and sold because they had skills, not just physical skills, but they were like intelligent, they were articulate, they were this, they were that. That's how things were, right? Um, and then also the idea in this is not just in Islam, this is in the Bible as well, in the Bible and in the Quran and in the Semitic way of looking at slavery, is that a slave is part of your family. The slave is part of your family. So in the Bible, for example, when the covenant to circumcise the boys is given to Abraham, that means it's given to Abraham's sons and grandsons and boys that he buys. So now basically you can be Bani Israel, you can be children of Israel through slavery, meaning you are a slave of somebody. So now you're part of that family. The Prophet ﷺ, he ruled that there was one woman had injured another woman who was pregnant, and the other woman lost her baby. So the Prophet ﷺ said, you have to give her a slave now. You have to give her a slave, meaning you've taken a family, taken some of her family away. You have to give her family back, right? So a slave is part of the family. The Prophet ﷺ said the loyalty between slave and master is like the rahim, is like the connection between brothers and sisters. It's like a family, right? If you had a man or a woman who was a slave and then became free and had no family member, that's your family. They're the people who will marry you off. They're the people who will pay your blood money, right? If you accidentally killed somebody or something like that. Like there's this, they would inherit from you and you would inherit from them, right? So it's kind of like it's a very different. So the idea of a slave is yes, you have to work, yes, you have to, but you are being protected and you're part of a clan, you're part of a tribe, you're part of a family. It's very, very different to what happened in the Americas. And I say what happened in the Americas because it is somewhat unique, right? Like what when you say slave, the way we think about slave is that's what happened in the Americas. It didn't happen elsewhere. Slavery has been existed throughout the history of mankind, all over the place. But the kind of like bad treatment that we saw in the Americas is something unique to the last 500 years in this particular part of the world, right? England, for example, we had slaves, but we don't really hear about slavery in England. It's not a really a big thing. It's not a we had slaves. Um, who is it? Who Aesop's Fables, right? You're familiar with Aesop's Fables, right? The rabbit and the tortoise and all these different stories. Aesop was a slave. So here's this absolute genius who comes up with these amazing allegorical stories, and he's a slave, right? So the idea of a slave that we see it is just a picture of racism, humanity, just very, very low human beings that can just treat anybody who is alive in the worst possible way, right? And this is something that's very low, and it's just indicative of people who messed up, right? Unfortunately, when you see what happened with the white people, what the white people did, what the Europeans did in North and South America, it's just very, very, very low. It's very disgusting, right? Like the Romans didn't behave like that. Romans came into Europe. They didn't. The Romans took over the whole of Europe, right? They didn't deal in that way. The Persians didn't deal in that way. So great civilizations of the past weren't like that. But what we saw with the English and the Germans and the Dutch and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish in the Americas is just low, just beyond low. It's just very, very disgusting. Can they become a mahram? They can be like a mahram, yeah. So a mahram meaning somebody you couldn't marry. So for example, like your if Mason, imagine if you were a slave, okay, and you were owned by a female. So you could see her without hijab because you can't touch her, but you could see her without hijab because she's kind of like your mum, you know? You know, who's familiar with the phrase "yes'm, no'm"? That might be in your neck of the woods, Zaid. That's like when you read Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, they use these "no'm, yes'm," right? That's from "yes, mom." No, mom, right? Yes, no, right? It's a way that certain people it became a certain way of in certain classes of people in England and in America speaking, but it's the idea. So you go home. She's your mistress, not your mistress as in a side wife. Mistress as in she's like your master. So you could see her without hijab. She's kind of like your mom, right? And then uh, but your master as well. Let's say. So you became free and you accidentally killed somebody. Your mistress and her family would pay the blood money, would pay the fine, so to speak, for the fact that you killed somebody. They're carrying that responsibility. If you were a female, they would marry you off. So you wanted to get married now, you're free, you wanted to get married, you're going to go back to them and say, hey, I want to get married. Can you come to the masjid and do the contract for me? Like they're like your family. Does that make sense? Okay. Nobody reads Tom Sawyer? Huckleberry Finn? Alhamdulillah. We don't believe in reading anymore. Reading is haram. Okay, alhamdulillah. Um, okay, go ahead, Zaid.
Oh, sure. I remember a few classes back you said that if a free man marries a slave, the
Yes.
child of that slave is
Uh-huh.
still a slave.
That is
So
correct.
I have
So
like a
that,
few questions about that. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, Bismillah. Go ahead, Zaid.
Um, the first thing I was curious, like, why is that the case if the lineage is through the father? Um, and then how does like parental rights work over that kid if he's a slave? Like, how does the father provide for a slave child? Like, how does that dynamic work?
Okay, so the lineage is through the father. That is correct. The lineage is through the father. So the lineage is through the father. So who is this person? So and so, son of so and so. However, what is this person on a financial level, right? Something that comes off your property is your property, right? The tree that grows out of your land is is yours. So the same thing. We say, here is this woman. I own her. You're married to her, but I own her. Okay. So I married her to you. You gave the mahar to me, not to her, because she's my property. So I gave you paid the mahar to me. So you have children with her. Her children are yours. You're going to provide for them. Uh, sorry, no, I'm going to provide because they're mine. Yeah, they're my property. I'm going to provide for them, and I could sell them as well, right? So when they get older, I can sell them. So that's why as well it is haram to marry a slave unless you cannot get married to a free woman because you continue slavery and the deen in principle is against slavery. Slavery is not the default, right? So you can't do that. So the lineage is to the father. Yes, you are so and so, son of so and so. That's correct, right? However, I have to support them because they're my property, and I can sell them because they're my property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair.
And so what happens then is with this female, I owned her, so I owned her physically, and I also had conjugal rights to her. I could have children with her, right? Now I marry her to you, I cannot have children with her anymore. I can't look at her, I can't touch her, I can't do anything. So she's like basically your wife and my property, if that makes sense, right? And then the scholars also debate they debate what if you had what if you what if you married, let's say I had two slaves, a male and a female, I marry them, okay? Like what level of autonomy do I have over them? Okay? Like could I make my male slave divorce his female slave? Like given that I own both of them. Like does he have autonomy now? Well, number one, can I force him to get married? And number two, can I force him to divorce his wife? So there's a debate there, right? Which is just indicative of like how much control you have over somebody else. But the essential idea that, you know, could you own somebody? Yes, you could. Is that Islamic? It's not Islamic, but that's just Islam dealing with the reality of the situation. Right? Yeah, the verse of the Quran mentions two things. Number one, you don't have the means, the financial means, and two, that you fear al-anat, you fear that you're going to commit zina. So this person is not able to get married. The going rate, what it would mean to in his where he lives, in order to get married, he would need X amount of money. The mahar would be kind of this kind of money. He doesn't have that at all, right? And so now he can marry someone's female slave, right? So those two conditions exist. Number one, so three conditions in three. There's two conditions agreed upon. Three, a third that's debated. Um, One is that you can't afford it. Two, that you fear committing zina, and then the third, which is that debated, is that this slave has to be a believer. So, is it a condition that they could you marry a non-Muslim female slave or not? That's a debate, right? As opposing to own. So you own a slave. Yes, you could own a non-Muslim slave, right? That's something else. So you could own a non-Muslim slave and you could have children with a female non-Muslim slave. That's totally different. But the issue is, could you marry them? Is it a condition that they be Jew or Christian? Right? That's another debate. Yeah. Does it make sense, Hafsa? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Surely Allah does not like whoever is arrogant and boastful. Those who are stingy, promoting stinginess in people and withhold Allah's bounties, we have prepared for the disbelievers a humiliating punishment. Likewise, for those who spend their wealth to show off and do not believe in Allah or the last day. And whoever takes Satan as an associate, i.e., by not believing in Allah and doing these bad things, what an evil associate is he, right? And so, how do you know you're associating with the shaitan? Is that you find the shaitan funny, right? Uh, I think I've mentioned to you the paradigm of Madagascar, right? Madagascar and what's it called? What's his name in Madagascar? King Julian. I'm sorry, I mentioned to you some before,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Remember, right? So what did I say, Aman? What's the paradigm? It's a very, very important paradigm. What is it? Like, how do I know Shaitan is my friend? Go ahead, Aman. Right? So I'm watching Madagascar, the cartoon, okay? And in it, there is this there is this guy. So it is Ali G or Burat or whatever it is, right? This is proper shaitan, like may Allah guide him, may Allah give him Islam and make him better than all of us. But a real, as he is a real shaitan. Like he's actually very intelligent and very well educated as well. So super, super shaitan. So anyway, so he's in the character, he's a ridiculously narcissistic, cross-dressing lemur or whatever it is, like some kind of animal. So when you find shaitan funny, what does that mean? Like when you find there's some character on TV that when he swore, he found it really funny. Like when they do these things, it's really funny. She's so funny, right? Like you identify with that character. You like that character. Okay, it makes you just there's this harmony between you and that person, right? And that person is shaitan. That means you're a shaitan. That's what it means, right? As opposed to a normal, healthy person, somebody who normal, healthy iman is like, I don't accept any of this, right? So I remember like watching The Simpsons with my grandma, right? My grandma is a non-Muslim, and she was like, "No way, you can't watch The Simpsons." Like, what's wrong with The Simpsons? Like, I don't get it. Like, what's wrong with The Simpsons? But she's like a normal person. It's like, this is really bad. Like, it's really bad. Like, everything is bad about it. It's just really rude and horrible. So somebody with fitrah, they have a certain way of looking at things. This is funny. This is not funny, right? And there's no connection to filth. There's no connection to yeah, it's haram, but it's just really funny. Like it makes you laugh anyway. But when you find that inroad, like there's this connection, like yeah, I connect with this character, I connect with that novel, and this novel is like a really vile and disgusting thing, then you know that shaitan is your buddy, right? And that's not good. May Allah protect us all, right? And so we should be the people who like that's just not even funny, right? And as a contrast, um, as a contrast, who's heard of the dead baby jokes, right? I know most of us are too old. That was a long time ago. You probably went to school, right? You know the dead baby jokes, Mason, right? So are they actually funny, or is it just like disturbing, right? So you will have these kids at school or people who are immature who'll be like, okay, basically every single the answer to the joke is a dead baby, right? Or something like that. Like it's like, what do you call this? And then it's like, huh? And you think about it, and then it's like, oh, a baby being killed in this way. It's like that's just not funny. Like it's just horrible. I don't like there's nothing in it that makes me laugh. Right? That's because you're somebody who has fitrah, that's because you're somebody who's pure. But if you're not, you find it funny, like haha. It's like, how is that funny? Right? Like, how is that funny? Like, I remember my friend at school, he said, what did Saddam Hussein's what was it? Why didn't Saddam Hussein buy some fries? In England, we call them chips. Fries for his son. He says, no, so Saddam Hussein's son says to him, "Oh, Dad, why wouldn't you buy me some fries?" Or like, why did the fries fall on the floor or something like that? It says, "Oh, because there's no bag, Dad." Like, haha, we nuked Baghdad. It's like, how is that funny? How is it funny that you have you been in a country that's been bombed? Like, do you know what it's like? Did you see what happened for the next like decade and more? Like, where are you? Like, how is that funny? Right? So when we find kufr funny, when we find swear words funny, when we have this connection, like that's what I would say, right? I remember my dad saying this thing is very interesting, right? So my dad grew up kind of in the end of the 60s, right? So rock and roll is a big thing, right? Rolling Stones, um, the band is like a big thing, right? And there is what's his name? Can't remember his name now. The lead singer of the head of the Rolling Stones. Anyway, um, but my dad had this. He remember this thing clicking in his head. He had kind of a dream vision where he saw this key singer from this band, and he was the shaitan. And I was like, oh, right. So you can see in my dad, there's this point like I've become Muslim now, and things are a bit more clear. Like what is actually happening, right? What is actually happening is like this is actually satanic. You know, this is actually satanic. And so when you have this thing like I don't find you funny anymore, I don't like that tune anymore, it doesn't resonate with me because there's nothing in me that's in you, and there's nothing that's in you that's in me, right? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ, right? This is really important surah. Like, I'm a believer, I'm not a disbeliever. I don't find it funny, I don't find it entertaining, I don't find it impressive. There's nothing good about it. In fact, I don't even want to speak English anymore. I only want to live in a non-Muslim country anymore, right? That kind of attitude is important. Many converts go through that. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with that whole system, right? And then you have a more balanced approach later on. Obviously, there's nothing evil about English or nothing evil about being an American country or whatever in itself. But it's just this thing like there's nothing that we share because you're just something else. I don't associate with the shaitan in any way, and it's not even funny. And if I saw it, I would want to vomit. I'd rather vomit than laugh, you know? So it's a really important thing, right? So we have to be very, very careful about the media that we've grown up with, meaning books, stories, songs, films that we've grown up with, and that our heart still ties onto, right? That's what it is, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, one of the things that how do you know? One of the things that with which you will find the sweetness of Iman is that you would prefer to be thrown into fire than go back to kufr after becoming Muslim. And so that means everything of my past or everything that I've grown up with, even if I've always been a Muslim, everything in my head that is un-Islamic, I find it revolting, and I don't identify with it. Right? Very important. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and what harm what harm could have come to them if they had believed in Allah? Why didn't you just believe? Like why did you follow this route? And the last day and donated from what Allah has provided for them. And Allah has perfect knowledge of them. Indeed, Allah never wrongs anyone, even by an atom's weight. If it is a good deed that they do, He will multiply it many times. If you do a good deed, He'll give you 10, right? And will give a great reward out of grace. So how will it be when we bring a witness from every faith community, every ummah, and bring you, O Prophet, as a witness against them? So the Prophet ﷺ, he loved us and loves us. And the Prophet ﷺ is continually making dua for us. Whenever we make a mistake, he's like, please forgive so and so. When we do something good, oh Allah, please accept. But he's in a very, very painful and awkward situation that he will stand on Judgment Day and he'll be asked, did you say this, 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 this? And say, yeah, well, why did they do this, 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 this then? Why is it the opposite? Why did they teach you one thing? The Prophet ﷺ died saying, look after slaves, and yet Muslims sold slaves to kuffar and treated them like worse than animals. Why did you do that? So the Prophet ﷺ, he doesn't want to be in that situation, but he's going to be in that situation. And he was crying, I believe it was Abdullah Mas'ud, I believe it was, that recited this verse to him. And he's like, I'm going to have to be in the situation where I testify against you. I don't want to be in that situation. Right? On that day, those who denied Allah and disobeyed the Messenger will wish they were reduced to dust. I wish I just didn't exist. I wish I just claimed bankruptcy. Like I don't exist, right? And they will never be able to hide anything from Allah. O believers, do not approach prayer while intoxicated. So originally, as we know, alcohol was permissible. People they could drink alcohol, right? They weren't originally forbidden to drink alcohol. So originally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, just don't come to the prayer drunk, right? Until you are aware of what you say. Okay? So this tells us that the believers, right? They say you want to go and drink, go and drink. Okay, when you're sober, come and pray. But don't come to the mosque while you're drunk because you don't know what you are saying. So therefore, when we religious, dedicated Muslims come to the masjid fully sober, but then we're not focused in prayer and we don't know what we're saying and we don't mean what we're saying, then it's not we're not doing what the Quran is talking about. So the Quran is not telling us pray the whole day. The Quran is not telling us leave your life and don't do anything. Allah is saying 5 times a day have a quality conversation with Allah in a group with everybody else if you're able. And if you're not able, at least have a quality conversation with me by yourself. But it's supposed to be quality. Salah is supposed to be quality conversation. You sat down and spoke to Allah in a meaningful way 5 times a day. And then it changed your behavior, helped put context to life, help you deal with the problems in your life, and it helped you, right? As opposed to say some random thing in some random Middle Eastern language, right? So we have to we don't have to know Arabic, but we have to kind of know, okay, I'm saying the Fatiha. What does the Fatiha talk about? Right? In sujood, what does it feel like? Right? Tashahhud, what am I talking about? But otherwise, if you're just saying some random thing in some Middle Eastern language, what's the point? You know, there's some Iranian comedian, I can't remember his name. He said, that if you're from the Middle East, you sound scary. You know, there's lots of, you speak Iranian, you Persian, you speak Arabic, you sound scary, right? So when you're in a plane, like, you just when you're speaking, just throw in some nice words here and there. So it's like strawberry, uh, um, kitten, and just throw in some nice words. It doesn't sound so bad, right? And so if unfortunately for many of us, it's like that's like some Middle Eastern language, and that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about, right? SubhanAllah, just last night I was reading. We did this in the class yesterday in Softening the Heart. One of the Salaf, he said, I prefer to just do one short surah and understand what it means than to do a whole Quran. Right? Imagine you did a khatam. You said, Allahu Akbar. He did a khatam last night. He finished the whole Quran from beginning to end. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. Will you focus? No. Okay, then what's the point? Right? So we focus on shakliyat. We focus on outward things. Oh, it's Ramadan. Oh, you fasted. Oh, you went to the masjid. Oh, you did a khatam. Oh, you did 20. Oh, you did. It's like that's not what the Salaf thought about. They didn't think about things like that. They understood focus, right? You're fasting. So what is it better? What's it better? You prayed 20 rak'ahs of Taraweeh and you did a khatam, 4 khatams you finished the Quran 4 times in this Ramadan in 8 different masjids, or that you fasted and the whole time you never had a grudge against anybody. What's more important? More important that you have a real fast. You fasted from food and drink and the haram, and you didn't harm anybody, and you weren't rude to people, you didn't take anything that wasn't yours. And whenever bad thoughts came to your mind, you pushed them away. Good. That's called fasting. So most of us we pray Taraweeh, but we don't fast. Like you do the extra, but you don't do the basics. Right? So what's the point? There's no quality. So it's very important. Don't pray while drunk. Right? Don't pray when you're not focused. Right? Pray when you're focused. Like, and even the fuqaha, they'll tell us, say, if you want to delay the prayer a little bit, fine. Like, I'm super like angry right now. I just had an argument with Mason. He's like, I lent him my car, and he just like, I said, don't go on this road, and he went on the road, and he crashed. I was like, bro, oh my God. I'm just like, like my mind isn't. I can't pray right now. Okay, Habibi, go for a walk and come back and then pray, because you're going to be distracted. You need to go to the bathroom. Okay, go to the bathroom, then pray. You need to check this email. Your daughter's in ICU and you want to find out the results are out or not. Right? Find out what the results are. Find out what they are. You calm now? Yeah, I'm calm. Okay, now go and pray because you're supposed to have a quality conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the whole point. Not that you just randomly do things, right? Until you are aware of what you say, nor in the state of full impurity, janaba, right? Um, right. So obviously you can't pray when in janaba, right? Somebody has relations with their spouse, or sexual fluids come out of them, then they're going to have to make ghusl, right? So you can't pray in that state unless you are merely passing through the masjid. So as we know, you cannot be in the masjid in major ritual impurity. So if you need to make ghusl, you can't be in the masjid, right? And therefore, a woman who is on a period, she cannot be in the masjid, right? If you're on your period, you can't be in the masjid because you need to make ghusl, right? Unless you are merely passing through. Okay, you're just walking through from one side to the other side, fine. Like the Umayyad Masjid in Damascus, you actually drive through the mosque. There's a road through the mosque, right? So you're just passing through one side to the other side. It's fine, right? Until you have bathed, right? But if you are ill, so now, okay, I need to make ghusl, and but I'm ill, and so if I have a shower, I'm going to get really sick. Or I'm on a journey and there's no water, or if I use the water, we'd all be thirsty tomorrow. So on a 10-day journey through the desert, we have enough water for 10 days. But if everyone's making ghusl, then we're not going to have enough water. So what do? Um, you make tayammum, right? So it says, so if you are ill and you have to make ghusl, and it would harm you to use water, then you can make tayammum. Or if there's no water and you have to make ghusl, then you can make tayammum. Or you have relieved yourselves, i.e., you've broken wudu. So tayammum is a substitute for ghusl and is a substitute for wudu, right? For both, right? Or have been intimate with your wives and cannot find water, then purify yourselves with clean earth, wiping your faces and hands. So here, let's look at this verse. So it says, if you need to make ghusl and you can't have a shower because you're sick, then make tayammum. That's one. And then it says, if you need to make ghusl and you're on a journey and there's no water, then make tayammum. That's two. Or you have relieved yourselves. If you need to make wudu, right? If you need to make wudu and you are ill, so you can't make wudu, or you're on a journey and there's no water, so you can't make wudu, then make tayammum. And then it says, or you have been intimate with your wives. Here, this verse of the Quran is vague, right? Like many verses of the Quran. It's vague. It says, or if you've touched women. So the ulama here, they debate this issue. What does it mean if you touch women? Right? So a whole spectrum of opinions here, right? So number one, are we talking about so one opinion is if you touch women, it's just a euphemism, a nice way of saying intercourse, right? So Ibn Abbas, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't use explicit terms. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses polite terms. So he mentions awla masdam nisa, right? Before it mentioned if you relieve yourself, okay, you need to make wudu. Or you've been intimate, you've quote unquote touched your wife, meaning you've been intimate, you need to make ghusl, then go ahead and make tayammum. Others have said no, it just means touching. Like here is a woman, you touch a woman, period, right? Here's a woman, you touch a woman. So you touch your mum, breaks your wudu. You touch your daughter, makes wudu. So there's a whole spectrum, right? But it's worth noting that yes, the Quran often can be understood in a whole spectrum of ways. That's true, right? So there is a pluralism. There's more than one way. However, there are certain opinions that over time have less and less votes, so to speak, and become weird, right? So I come along and say, yeah, if you touch your mum, you have to make wudu. So I say, how many scholars have said that? I mean, is it a valid interpretation of the Quran? Yes, I mean, in principle, a valid interpretation of the Quran. It says, "Ola mastam," and it's that if you touch women, your mother's a woman. So there we go, right? It is in principle a valid interpretation, but like in terms of votes, right? Let's look over the last 1,400 years of scholarship. Okay, people understanding the Quran, looking at the Quran and Hadith. Like what percent of people have said things like that? Like it's basically zero. It's like handfuls of people. So in general, when I come to the Quran and Hadith, and I say that Quran and Hadith can often be understood in more than one way, fantastic. But is it okay for me to go and follow an opinion that is super fringe, that like a handful of people have said? Or should I follow positions that thousands of people have said, right? So if you go to the issue, for example, that you say, this verse says, as he translated here, you've been intimate, okay? That's a position, right? That's a position that's been adopted by thousands of scholars, right? Thousands of scholars have said the verse is talking about intimacy, i.e., you need to make ghusl, you don't have water, or you can't use the water, so you make tayammum, right? Thousands of scholars have said that. Thousands of thousands. That's a strong position. You meet Allah on Judgment Day saying, hey, I follow that interpretation, fine. Other positions, for example, touching with lust, right? That's thousands of scholars have said that, right? Touching with lust, right? It means touching with lust. If you touch with lust, it breaks your wudu. Okay, if you don't touch with lust, it doesn't break your wudu. Others have said no, it's just touching, but it has to be touching somebody that you could lust after, right? Like you wouldn't, so it's not normal for somebody to be attracted to their mum or to their daughter or to their sister, right? That's not normal. So they would mean like touching somebody that you could in principle have lust towards, like meaning somebody who is marriageable in principle, right? So even, for example, you accidentally touch someone else's wife, like you touched her hand accidentally. In principle, you could have lust towards someone else's wife, right? Obviously, you couldn't marry them because they're married, but the point is it's there, right? So that's another like way of looking at it, these things. But there's certain ways of looking at it that are just very fringe, like, oh, if I touched any woman at all, right? Like that's a bit weird, right? Similarly, most scholars, right, because we believe in analogy, they say, well, what's the difference between a man touching a woman and a woman touching a man, right? Most scholars would say that. So they would say, look, it mentions intimacy. Obviously, that's a two-way street to begin with, right? But even if you said, what if, for example, what if a woman touched a man with lust, right? Or a woman touched a man who she could, in principle, have lust for, right? So, most scholars would say it's the same thing. So there's certain opinions that would be like, yeah, this way of thinking, many, many people have adopted. This other way of thinking, yeah, tons, right? There's more than one way. But there are certain positions that are merely conceptually valid, but in practice, very, very, very few people have ever adopted. Does that make sense? And so we have to, we have to kind of be a bit mature and say, you're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one day, and He's going to ask you, what did you do? And then you're going to say, oh, I was following like Farid Dingle's opinion. It's like, well, Farid Dingle is one of like a million people, of a billion people, of more than a billion people. Like, why did you follow him over somebody else? So that's why when we talk about fiqh, when we talk about halal haram, we say, oh, we're going to say, oh, this is the madhab of this, meaning the Hanafi madhab, meaning this is like 10,000 plus scholars have all given this answer. Okay, great. Like it's not random then, is it? It's not just some opinion. The Hanbali school has said this. Okay, like 10,000 plus scholars have said this. Okay, great. Not a problem, right? The Maliki school said like 10,000 plus people working with a certain framework and a certain system and with a certain discussion between them, they came to this conclusion. Okay. As opposed to, oh, so and so said this, like an individual. You know what I'm saying? Like that's like really weird. Like, why would you do that? And so in this context, sometimes it doesn't matter even who it is. So for example, when we're reading this verse, right, it says, but if you are ill on a journey or have relieved yourselves, then make tayammum, right? So basically, I just mentioned to you that tayammum, using dust or dirt to wipe your face and arms in a replacement is a replacement for both what? What did I mention? Is it a replacement for both ghusl and wudu, right? You need to make ghusl, and you can't, you make tayammum. You need to make wudu, you can't. So Ibn Sayyidina Umar, right? Sayyidina Umar is Sayyidina Umar, right? He's like one of the biggest scholars ever in the world, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, like, he's like, he would almost be a prophet, basically, right? Like, if there was a prophet after, it would be Sayyidina Umar. Like, he's an amazing person. He independently had opinion. His opinion was that tayammum is a replacement for wudu, not for ghusl. So if you need to make ghusl, there's no replacement, and that's it. You just don't pray. And so they asked him, so yeah, but sometimes we're in this desert village, right? And there's not enough water. and people can't have showers because there's not enough water. So he said, yeah. So they asked him, they're like, Sayyidina Umar, are you saying that I don't pray? That, yeah, you just don't pray until rain comes. So even Sayyidina Umar, I will object to his opinion. Why? Because not mainstream. Because no one else agreed with him. Does that make sense? So it's not about who you are. It's about how you fit in civilization. Does that make sense? Like you said something and everybody else agreed with you, that's right. Or you said something and many, many thousands of other people agreed with you. That's a sound way of thinking. As opposed to you're Sayyidina Umar, who is Sayyidina Umar, right? He's amazing, but nobody agreed with you. I'm not going to come along and follow that position. Does that make sense? Right? So that's why, for example, I'm Shafi, I teach Shafi fiqh, right? If somebody asks me a question, I'm like, it's halal, it's haram, quote. What am I doing is I'm saying, how many thousand people say the same thing? Does that make sense? That's what I'm doing. As opposed to, oh, I've asked, my opinion is this, right? My mate Dave, that's what we use in England, right? My mate Dave said this. It's like, fantastic. Your friend Dave says it's halal. Wow. Right. But I don't really care what I don't let alone say something like saying even if it was saying Omar, that's the point. So you're like, are you saying, but you asked this sheikh? I said, yes, but the sheikh is quoting himself. That's the difference. That sheikh is quoting himself. I asked this sheikh and he said it was halal. Yeah, but he's quoting himself. When you ask me, I'm not quoting myself. Can you see the difference? Like I'm quoting these 1,000 people or these 10,000 people. So it's not about me and not about him. It's about how many thousands of people have said that, right? So it's very important, key tool, right? Someone like Mason, poor guy, just becomes Muslim, whatever, a few years ago, and there's like all these different opinions, and somebody said this, somebody said that. And a simple question he can ask is, okay, is this halal, is this haram? And then somebody says, how many thousand people agree with you? And they're like, huh? Right? Somebody who is traditionally trained, somebody who's a Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hamdi, like, oh yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yes, here are all the books. These are all these classical works. I can show you thousands of people who say the same opinion, right? And it's been confirmed and it's correct and it's accurate, right? Whereas otherwise, he goes and asks some dude and he's like, oh yeah, I think it's halal, you know? And it's just his opinion. And that would be even the case, even if it was Sayyidina Umar, even if it was Sayyidina Abu Bakr, even if it doesn't matter who it is, right? But when you have thousands of people, then you can stand before Allah and say, Ya Allah, I followed a deen based on the understanding of thousands of people, not the fringe opinion of one or two people here and there. Does that make sense? Right? And so we're living in a time where lots of fringe opinions are becoming popular, right? Right? So you look at basically any Islamic website and they're going to have music in the background. Like any Islamic website, they're going to do it. Here in Malaysia, it's very normal. Everyone just music in the background is not a problem, right? And you go and ask, somebody's like, is music halal? They're like, well, I mean, a few scholars here and there said music is halal. So, I mean, in principle, it's a valid opinion, right? But it is very fringe, right? That's not what the thousands have said. That's what like the individuals have said. Like here you find, here's a scholar who said, yeah, it's fine if it has, there's no inappropriate language and it achieves good, fine goals, fine. So that's an example, right? Taking a hijab off, or I don't know, many things that people have said, fringe opinions, right? Um, being in a masjid when you're in janaba, right? When you need to make ghusl. So they said, yeah, they can do that, right? You can be in a masjid if you're menstruating. You can be in a masjid if you need to make ghusl. That's an opinion. It exists, right? It exists. Okay. But how many thousands of people have said that? Very few, right? Very few. Eating meat from any Jew or Christian, doesn't matter how they slaughter it, right? It's a very minority opinion. It exists, right? In principle, it's there, but it's very, very fringe. So should we meet Allah on Judgment Day following the fatwa of an individual, no matter how great he is, or should we meet Allah with following the fatwa of groups of scholars, large body of scholars, right? The answer is the latter, right? The latter. Okay, so let's just quickly finish this ayah. So it says, um, but if you are ill, or have been intimate with your wives and cannot find water, then purify yourselves with clean earth. So here there's a debate. When you say tayammum, what does it mean? Right? It has the word side. So this side, clean earth, does it mean earth or does it mean anything that naturally comes out of the ground? So one group of scholars, they said you can make tayammum by wiping like a rock, like there's a boulder, okay? You're walking through the desert, there's not enough water to wash with, so you just wipe your hand over a boulder, okay? And then wipe your face, wipe your hand over the boulder again, wipe your arms, and that's it. Go and pray, right? You're in hospital and there's a marble ledge next to you, right? You just wipe your hand over the marble ledge, wipe your face, wipe your hand over the marble ledge again, wipe your arms, that's it, pray, right? Other scholars, they say no, it says sa'id is from masa'ada to go up, right? It is the dust that rises. So the other scholars say no, what's happening is instead of putting water on your face, you're putting dust on your face, right? Like if you see chickens having dust baths or other animals do it, chickens do it, many birds have dust baths, right? So they're actually trying to get dust into their plumage, right? They're trying to get dust inside there. That's a thing that they're trying to do, right? So is it a kind of a ritual where you touch something from the ground, like the earth or like a rock, or is it specifically getting dust onto your face and arms? There's a debate. Okay, there's a debate there. And then it says wiping your faces and your hands, right? The verse says arms, right? So it's a bit confusing. So here we have a debate as well. When it says in tayammum, you wipe your face, we understand what the face is. Okay, but when you say wipe your arms, like you have to wipe, like your arm ends at your shoulder, right? So in wudu, do you wash your upper arm in wudu? Or is it just your lower arm?
Only to your elbow.
So your elbow, right? Here it doesn't mention in the verse of wudu, it says wash your arm up to your elbow. But here it just was washing your arm. So here's a debate. Like, what does that mean then? So do I wash like so most scholars have said, well, given that tayammum is a replacement for wudu, it would make sense to do what?
Wash to your elbow.
Well, yeah, you now wipe right up to your elbow, right? So you before you washed up to your elbow, now I'm replacing it. So I'm just going to wipe up to my elbow. Other scholars say no. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ once demonstrated tayammum to somebody. And he explained to them, he said, there was a Sahabi, he didn't know what to do. So he had to make ghusl. So he like took all his clothes off and like rolled in the dust, tried to get dust all over his whole body. The Prophet ﷺ said, you don't have to do that. It's not like that. Tayammum is not your whole body. When you make tayammum, you just wipe your face and arms. And so the Prophet ﷺ said it would have been enough to just do this. And he wiped his two hands, not his lower arm, like just his hands. And that's in Sahih Muslim. So some scholars say the Prophet ﷺ was demonstrating how to wipe, not what to wipe. Others say no, the Prophet ﷺ was demonstrating what to wipe. And so accordingly, you could just wipe your hands, right? And so if you can imagine I was in hospital, right? And I have like you know, I'm on the drip, I've got a catheter here, and I'm like, hey, alhamdulillah, I can just follow that opinion, just wipe my hands and face, right? It makes it much easier, right? It's going to be much easier, right? But otherwise, we should be more careful and try and, avoid the debate and wipe the whole amount. Okay. Inshallah. Okay. And then it says, indeed, Allah is ever pardoning. The deen is easy. Oh, I don't have water. Oh, then I will never accept your prayers. It's not like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, oh, you have a problem? I'll accommodate. I'm ever pardoning and forgiving. I'll accommodate. You can't do this? I'll accommodate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is accommodating. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not this horrible, nasty, scary idol that you will curse you because you accidentally slipped over and poured the holy water on the floor, or you had the wrong name. It's not like that. Allah is a personal God who is kind and forgiving and understanding, and He makes difficulty turn into ease, right? He makes difficulty turn into ease. He says, oh, you don't have any water? Don't worry, you can do something else. You didn't do this? Don't worry, you can do something else. This is how the deen is. This is how our relationship is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They say, al-ibadah mabniya ala al-musamaha, right? Worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is based, the default structure is things are overlooked. Things are overlooked, right? Which is different with your relationship with other people, right? With other people, things are not by default overlooked, right? I parked on Mason's drive for 2 weeks and he couldn't park his car. The default is he minds, and the default is he's going to complain about it on Judgment Day. That's the default, right? The assumption is you wrong somebody, take somebody's right, they're going to take every single thing from you on Judgment Day. That's the default. Whereas the default with Allah is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiving and pardoning. He just overlooks things. And then you just try your best and do something else. You can't do that, try your best. You just keep going, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is easy going. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so just quickly verse over again. So don't come to the mosque unless you're unless you're sober, because you need to know what you're saying. Don't come to the mosque in janaba because you can't be in the masjid when you're menstruating or you need to make ghusl. Okay, unless you're just passing through, which is fine. If you're sick and you can't wash because it will get worse, you get whatever it is, then you make tayammum. If you're on a journey and there's no water, then make tayammum. And then the debate here, was it intercourse, or was it touching, or was it touching like this, touching like that? There's different opinions, and then we just took that as an opportunity to talk about fringe opinions, right? What would you do? You know, is it valid to follow the position of Sayyidina Umar that, oh yeah, if you need to make ghusl, you just don't pray for like 3 months until it rains. Like, can we follow fringe opinions? We said, no, you cannot follow fringe opinions. We're not trying to say that Sayyidina Umar is a kafir, right? So kafir would be he doesn't believe in the Quran and Sunnah, he doesn't accept the verse. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm just saying that, or that he went against the Quran. Maybe he's right. I don't know. But the point is, it's not valid for me and you to follow the position of a fringe person. You want to follow something that is widespread. That's why Muslims traditionally, from China all the way to Spain, everybody was Maliki, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, meaning I'm following a large body of scholars with a very refined system of halal and haram, as opposed to a fringe opinion that somebody just came up with today, right? Or even of the past, right? Okay, and then we mentioned tayammum. We said, is it with anything that comes out of the ground, or is it specifically earth? And then we said wiping your face, and then we said with the hands, is it specifically the hands or is it the arms? The default should be the up to the elbows, because that's what you're doing wudu. And then based on that hadith, one way of understanding hadith is no, you can just do the hands. Okay, and then we mentioned the principle that what the default with Allah, your interaction with Allah, is things are overlooked and forgiven, right? You get Hajj wrong, right? Imagine if Saudi announced the beginning of Dhul Hijjah the wrong day. Okay, so then everybody was at Arafah on the wrong day. So what do we say? It says it doesn't matter. You know, and then we saw the new moon on the 28th. So that's impossible. That means we started a day late. We started Dhul Hijjah a day late. That means Arafah, the day of Arafah, where everybody has to be at Arafah on that day, they were not there on that day because they got the day wrong. So what do we say? Everybody come back, spend another $10,000 coming on Hajj again, travel across. You walked, crawled, biked, cameled, rode from China all the way across Central Asia, all the way through Iran, all the way through Iraq, the scorching desert. And sorry, bro, you have to come back next year. No. What do we say? We say if everybody gets Arafah wrong, it doesn't matter. We just autocorrect. Don't worry about it. It's overlooked, right? You're fasting and you accidentally ate some food, doesn't matter. It's overlooked. You're praying and you forgot you were praying and start looking around, doesn't matter. It's okay, right? Not a problem, right? Things are overlooked. What about zakat then? Is zakat overlooked? Hey, I forgot to give an extra $5. That's okay. Is that overlooked? The answer is no. Why? Why is it not overlooked? Because it is the rights of whom? Of others. Aha. So, right? وأصل المعاملة المشاحة. The default with mu'amalat, with dealing with other people, is that they want to have every single thing. And they have a right to every single right that they have. And nothing can be overlooked. Right? But with Allah, things are overlooked. So zakat, there's no forgiveness. It's not okay. Because it's about the rights of the poor. Whereas everything else, khalas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always going to overlook things. This is kind of difficult. It's overlooked. It's overlooked. It's easy. Right? خير إن شاء الله وصلت إن شاء الله تعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم جزاكم خير السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته